Hey guys, and welcome to Toby Talks Tech. I'm Toby, and today we're going to talk some tech. In the last part of this tutorial series, I showed you everything you ever need to know about how the internet works in a 5-minute crash course, so you should be all good to go. Now, before we jump into the code, we still need to set up our computer, our development environment, and all of the tools that we need to start building modern web applications, and that's exactly what we're going to do in this tutorial. Now, there's tons of different technologies and platforms and environments and tools available to build your web applications, but in this tutorial series we are going to use nodeJs. The reasons for using nodeJs is that, for one, it's actually pretty easy to learn. It is open source, which means it's absolutely free, it doesn't cost you a dime, and you can download it and modify it to your heart's content. It is cross-platform, which means it'll run on Windows, it'll run on Mac, and it'll run on Linux. And it's got a really strong community support, so it's really easy to find additional libraries and documentation and help. Plus, in the end, it's actually really easy to deploy Node.js applications into the AWS cloud. This is once again going to be a very easy tutorial, so even if you've never used Node before, maybe you never even heard of it before, you should have no problem following along. But now, before I talk your ears off, let's jump right into the tutorial. Now, the very first thing you want to do is you want to download and install Node. And in order to do that, simply go to Google and let's search for Node. As you can see, Google has absolutely no problem locating Node. And because I'm in Australia, I'm going to see the Australian website first. But simply go to nodejs.org, which is the official website for Node.js. And right there in your face, you will find the downloads for your operating system. For me, that is Windows. But obviously, Node can also run on macOS, Linux, or whatever other operating system you may be running on. Let's simply click on the button for recommended for most users, and Google will download the installer right onto my computer. Once your internet has managed to download the installer, simply run it and install the application on your computer. You may have to accept a few licenses, but that's okay, it's all open source software anyways. And then you can select a folder where you want to install Node.js. Now, it doesn't really matter where you install it to, just remember where you installed it to. Let's hit next. Yep, just everything default. Hit next and install. And this will install Node.js on your computer. And it's as simple as that. Node is installed, and to verify that everything is set up correctly, you can simply open up a command prompt or a terminal window if you're on Linux or macOS and type node-v, and that should display the current version of Node, which is version 6.9.2, which is exactly what we have installed. Now, if you do see a Node not recognized command error in here, what you have to do is essentially, when you run a command from the command line, Windows or your operating system will look in a number of default paths for running that program from. If it can't find Node, then it's just going to say, I don't know what that is. Now, if you remember, we installed Node in program files. Where is it? Node.js. So C program files Node.js is the folder that Windows needs to recognize as a folder that it can run programs out of. And this happens via an environmental variable, which usually gets set during the installation process, but it may not. And if it doesn't happen, you should know how to fix this. In order to fix that, what you have to do is, and again, I'm on Windows 10, on your Windows system, it may be slightly different. Come up in here and let's search for environment. And I want to edit the system environment variables. I believe in the older versions of Windows, I think you go to, there's a system link here, which will take you into it. So again, because I'm on Windows 10, it's slightly different, and let's spell this correctly and go to edit the system environment variables. Let's bring this in, and in this little tab you'll find environment variables. Let's bring this up, and here you either have user variables or system variables. It doesn't really matter. Usually when you install Node, it should add it to the system variables. So in here you should find a path variable, which is a semicolon separated list of directories. You can double click this. On Windows 10 you get this really nice list, and what you want to make sure that in here somewhere you have C program files Node.js, and this is the folder that we installed Node in. If you don't have this folder in your path variables, or it's incorrect, you need to fix it and make sure that this is available to Windows so Windows can figure out where to find your Node program. After you've modified your environmental variables, you will need to restart your command prompt or your terminal, and then you should be able to type node-v to get your node version, and this should all work fine. And because Node by default installs npm as part of the Node package, you should also be able to go npm-v, which will print out the version of the Node package manager, which is 3.10.9. So we're essentially all set up with Node. The next thing I recommend you install is Visual Studio Code. For that, let's return to Google. And let's search for Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a super lightweight but extremely powerful text editor and programming tool that to me is really the best one out there. I've tried Notepad, Notepad++, Sublime Text, WebStorm, Atom, a whole bunch of them. Somehow Microsoft got it right with this one. I love Visual Studio Code. Plus, it's absolutely free and it is available for Windows, for Mac, for Linux, for whatever. So go to code.visualstudio.com and download, in this case for Windows. I don't need to download this. I already have it downloaded and installed because I use it on a almost daily basis. But again, you just need to click download for Windows and it will start downloading the installer. You run the installer and then you should be all set up to go. I highly recommend that you read through the pretty neatly laid out getting started documentation for Visual Studio Code. There's some neat stuff that you can do and how you can use all of the tools. But, you know, in order not to bore you for this tutorial, let's jump right into Visual Studio Code. This is Visual Studio Code. By default, you have a little text editor on the right, and in here you can type whatever you want. Over on the left-hand side, you have a number of tabs. The top one will show you your file explorers, which right now we don't have a folder open. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open a folder that I have pre-prepared. Node Express tutorial, part 2. And again, just open up any empty folder that you want. Nah, I don't need to save this. So here we are, just in an empty folder. There's nothing in there yet. So on the left, you have the file explorer. You have search. You have Git integration, and Git is a source version control system, which I will talk about in another tutorial. Then obviously you can essentially debug your Node code, or you can actually write Visual Studio Code. You can write with .NET in Visual Studio Code, so you can obviously debug all of that as well. And at the very end, you will find extensions, and you can find a huge amount of really useful extensions that you can install into Visual Studio Code that give you all sorts of additional features for syntax highlighting, searching, parsing, code snippets, debugging, anything that you can think of. This interface is essentially where we're going to do pretty much all of our work, but before we get into that, there's one other tool that if you're on Windows, if you're on Mac or Linux, it doesn't matter. If you're on Windows, I highly recommend it because, quite honestly, the default Windows command prompt sucks for writing code. It's clumsy, clunky, limited, it's not very nice. I highly recommend you download another tool if you're on Windows, and for that, let's go to Google. And the tool I recommend you get is called conemu, and it's a console emulator, and the one we want is conemu.github.io, which is essentially just terminals, like Linux style bash terminals, but running in Windows. You can have multiple tabs. It's much more flexible. It's got color coding. It is really nice to use. And just go to conemu.github.io, and on this site simply click download, and you will get a number of options for either a portable, so you don't actually need to install this, you can run this out of folder. Personally, I prefer the installer. This is the simple stable version, so 32 or 64-bit. You can simply run this. It's just 5 megabytes. It's pretty small, so you can just download and install that. Obviously, I already have it installed, and if you bring it up, conemu looks like this. So right now here I have a simple bash shell, which I have navigated to the folder that I have opened in Visual Studio Code, so that's my part 2 folder. For this tutorial, it doesn't really matter where you created the folder, just make sure that within conemu you navigate to the same folder that you are within Visual Studio Code. If you don't know how to navigate around in shell with the cd ... or cd whatever the subfolder is commands, shoot me a comment, I will explain that in a separate tutorial. So here we are in my part 2 folder, and remember, in Visual Studio Code I'm also in my part 2 folder, so we are in the same structure. Let's return to conemu, and again, just to double check, we can run node-v to check the Node version, or npm-v to check the Node package manager version, and all of that is set up and installed. And one last thing before I let you go, let's write and run a really tiny Node program. Now, Node Package Manager is really great for setting up your projects, and the only thing you need to do is you need to be in an empty folder, or preferably empty folder, and simply run npm space init, and this will initialize a new project within the folder that you currently are. Hit enter and you will see that this well, it essentially spells out what it's going to do. npm is going to run you through creating a package.json file, and the JSON file format, again, something I can discuss in another tutorial, just a simple text file that essentially specifies the format and the package of your project. So we can give it a name. If you don't type anything, I'll just use the default. I'll just use part-02, and I'm okay with that. Version can remain 1.0.0, that's fine. Description, let's call it our first ever Node.js program. Entry point can be index.js. Personally, I like to change this to server.js, but we'll do that in another tutorial. For now, let's go index.js, just because we're not going to actually write a server code. We're just going to write a really minimalistic Node application. So index.js, or we can just leave it blank, hit enter. Test command, leave that blank, hit enter. Git repository, until you're familiar with Git and know how to set that up, let's leave it blank. Keywords, whatever keywords, let's call it Node.js, comma, beginner, and whatever else keywords you want to give it, just makes it easy to discover. The author, let's put your name in. License, again, you can specify something specific. I'm just going to leave it by default. And it's then going to ask you, is all of this okay? So here's your name, version, description, the main script, testing commands, keywords, the author and the license. Is this okay? Let's just hit enter and say yes. And what's going to happen if I go to Visual Studio Code now, and I expand my part2 folder, I have a package.json here, and that's the package.json that npm images created for us. And here's the contents. That's exactly what we just created. Now, obviously, we have nothing to run yet. Node.js runs JavaScript. It runs .js files. So in my part2 folder, let's click on this new file icon, and let's create an index.js file. Because remember, in our package.json, we told our project that our main file is going to be called index.js. So let's create a file and call it index.js, hit enter, and this is going to be the main file for our project. And in here we can simply write our first line of JavaScript, and I'm simply going to write console.log, open a round bracket, and single quotes. You can use double quotes as well, but this is a whole philosophical debate about single or double quotes for JavaScript. I prefer single quotes for strings. And let's simply write hello node, close that bracket, and a semicolon at the end. You will notice that Visual Studio Code helps you a lot while you're typing things. It'll automatically close quotes and brackets, and it'll highlight missing elements, for example. So index.js, this little dot just means we haven't saved this file, so hit Ctrl S to save your index.js file. So now you have a package.json and an index.js file. So now how do we run this? Node executes from the command line, and people always freak out, ooh, command line, that's scary. Now you can set up debugging and everything, but that's quite complicated. For now, we're just going to run it through the command line because, quite frankly, A, it's fun and exciting and nerdy. On the other hand, it's also a lot simpler. So let's return to conemu. And again, if you didn't install conemu, you can just use the command prompt if you really want to. Personally, I just prefer conemu, but again, it's all up to you. In our part2 folder, let's go ls space -1l. Again, just follow along. This will simply just list out the contents of my current directory, because I just want to make sure that in my directory, I have two files, and I have my index.js and my package.json, so I am in the same folder that I can see in Visual Studio Code. And then I can simply run node space index.js to execute node using index.js. So let's hit enter, and there you go. Hello node. Cool, that's really exciting. Now the last thing, just to make this a little bit easier and integrate a little bit better with how the server will get executed in the end and how we're going to deploy it into AWS, let's again return to Visual Studio Code. Let's go into the package.json file, and you can actually simplify the process of starting up your program. And the way you can do this is in your package.json file, there's a scripts section. So these are little scripts that npm can execute. And these are scripts that you can run when your application is installed, uninstalled, when it's started up, when it's torn down, etc. So in the script section, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new line and call this start. And in here, I'm essentially going to write start in double quotes. And because this is a JSON file, this may confuse a few people. In JSON, you will have to use double quotes for strings. JSON is slightly different from JavaScript. It can be confusing. So just remember, if it's a .json file, all your strings, everything that's like a piece of text needs to be in double quotes. In your JavaScript file, I highly recommend using single quotes for everything because it's quite neater and it'll work better with linters. And again, linting is a topic for another tutorial. So let's go back to the package.json file. And in here, we're going to write start in double quotes, colon, and then again in double quotes, we're going to go node index.js. And at the end, the reason this text here is highlighted, and again, just the help from Visual Studio Code is telling you something's wrong. This is something is, there you go. It's even telling you expected comma or closing bracket or closing brace. So at the end here, we need to add a comma, and there you go. So now this is nice JSON. But remember, nodeIndex.js is essentially the command that we executed, nodeIndex.js, to run our application. But now we're essentially telling Node that in my scripts I have a start script that will run nodeIndex.js. So again, let's save our file. Now, how do we run this? How do we run start? For that, let's return to conemu, and now we can still run nodeIndex.js. That'll work just the same way. However, we now can also run npm start, because start is the little snippet that we've defined here and that will execute nodeIndex.js. So in conemu, if we run npm start, enter, there you go. It has executed Node and it is running hello Node. And there you go. You've just successfully programmed and executed your very first Node program. And that's all there is to it. We're all set up and we even ran our first ever Node program. Do you feel like a coder yet? If you enjoyed this video, please show your support by liking, favoriting and sharing it. Don't forget to subscribe for more content, and if you do have any comments, questions or suggestions, just leave them down in the section below. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.